My son and daughter-in-law didn't invite me to Thanksgiving. My son said, "My wife's family is coming to visit. Your blue-collar job would embarrass me." "Understood," I said, and left. 5 days later, they rang my doorbell, furious. The moment her father saw me, he immediately said, "Let me step back a little. My name is Nora, 58 years old, 30 years of kindergarten in Queens, and when I finally retired, the school gave me a small plaque and a card signed by every staff member. I cried the entire drive home. Thomas would have loved that plaque. He was an elementary school teacher, 2 different school, same borough, same salary that never quite stretched far enough at the end of the month. We weren't people who had extra. We had enough, and we were careful with it. Friday nights meant splitting a pizza at the kitchen table and calling it a celebration. When Daniel was born, Thomas looked at him for a long time and then looked at me and said, "We're going to have to get really good at saving money." He was smiling when he said it. So was I. We got very good at it. Packed lunches every day for 18 years. Vacations meant 2 nights at the Jersey Shore, never anywhere that required a plane ticket. When Daniel's school needed supplies, we bought them out of our own pockets without saying a word. When Daniel wanted to play soccer, Thomas coached the team himself, so they'd never have to pay the club fee. When Daniel got into a good college with a partial scholarship, we took out a small loan and covered the rest. Thomas picked up weekend tutoring. I did after-school care 3 afternoons a week, on top of my regular hours. Every semester somehow we managed it. Thomas died, the spring of Daniel's senior year. Heart attack. He was 54, sitting at his desk, grading papers, and then he was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. I finished paying Daniel's final semester tuition by myself. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because that's the kind of people we were. You keep going. You finish what you started. You don't make your grief into someone else's burden. Daniel graduated, got a job, then a better one. Within a few years, he was a project manager at a construction firm, wearing pressed shirts, going to dinners I couldn't afford to attend. I was proud of him every single day. Still am. That part doesn't go away no matter what else does. Then he brought home Vivian. She was polished, sharp. The daughter of Harold Whitmore, who owned a construction company and had the kind of money that came with a reserved parking spot and a name somewhere on a building. She shook my hand when we met, firm grip, quick release, and looked around my apartment once with the eyes of someone assessing a property they have no intention of buying. She never called me Mom, not once in 3 years. Always Nora, with a small pause before it, the way you say the name of someone you've only just been introduced to. The visit started at 2 hours, then 1 hour, then 45 minutes, with Vivienne checking her phone partway through. Always something urgent. Always something that had just come up. Daniel would glance at her, then back at me, and start reaching for his jacket. Once, I made a full pot of soup, the kind that takes 3 hours. By the time they arrived, Vivienne mentioned she'd already eaten. Daniel said he wasn't that hungry. I ate that soup alone for 5 days straight. Another time, I put on a blouse I'd bought specifically to look presentable, newer fabric, cleaner cut. Vivienne's eyes moved over it once. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. And Daniel, my Daniel, who used to call twice a week, who used to come by just to sit at the kitchen table and talk about absolutely nothing. He stopped doing that somewhere around year 2 of the marriage. I couldn't tell you the exact date. It wasn't a single moment. It was a drift. Slow and steady, invisible. Until one afternoon I picked up the phone to call him and realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd called me first. I told myself it was the season of life. Newlyweds are busy. They pull inward. That's normal. I told myself a lot of things. Then came that phone call. It wasn't Daniel who called first. It was Vivienne. No greeting, no small talk. Her voice carried the smooth, flat quality of someone reading from a script they'd gone over more than once. "My father is considering transferring his entire company to Daniel," she said. "A successful man can't have a mother collecting a $1,400 pension check. You understand what I'm saying? Clean and clear. This wasn't about embarrassment. This was about money, a company, a future she'd been arranging piece by piece, and I was the one piece that refused to fit. An hour later, Daniel called. Mum, flat, careful. The voice of someone who'd already decided on his answer before the conversation started. About Thanksgiving. Is this your decision or hers? 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds of silence on the line. Mum, please don't make this a big deal. 3 seconds told me more than anything he'd said in 3 years. So, Thanksgiving. Instant noodles. 1 bowl. The kitchen table with 2 chairs. The television switched on in the other room, not to watch anything, just for the sound of another voice filling the apartment. Thomas's chair sat across from me, same place it had been for 32 years. My eyes landed on it without meaning to. And there was his voice in my head, clear as anything, that crooked little grin, and the same line every single Thanksgiving without fail. Nora, who do I thank if you're not here? Not clever. A little ridiculous, honestly. I'd give anything to hear it one more time. My phone buzzed. A message from Margaret, a woman I'd taught alongside for 20 years before we both retired. The kind of friend who still mails handwritten birthday cards. She'd sent a link and typed, Nora, is this Daniel's wedding? Why aren't you in any of these photos? A resort, 5 stars, white flowers covering every surface, 200 guests, Harold Whitmore seated in the front row, beaming. Daniel had told me they weren't having a wedding. Too expensive, he said. I kept scrolling. Then I stopped. 1 chair, pulled slightly apart from the rest. White roses arranged carefully across the seat. A small handwritten card propped against them. In loving memory of our parents. My eyes moved from that chair to the empty one across my kitchen table. For the first time in 6 years, I was glad Thomas wasn't sitting in it. I followed the tagged posts until I found the video. Daniel stood at the podium in a rented tuxedo, voice steady and unhurried. It's a shame my parents aren't here to see this day. The television was still going in the other room. Someone listing everything they were grateful for. I turned the phone face down on the table, placed both hands flat on the surface, spoke to the empty chair across from me the way I'd been doing, quietly, without telling anyone for 6 years. Thomas, I know what I need to do. That night, after the phone went face down on the table, I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I pulled the cardboard box out from under the bed. Thomas's box. The one I'd sealed after the funeral and shoved under there because I wasn't ready to open it and wasn't sure I ever would be. Old documents, mostly. A few photographs. A warranty card for a refrigerator we'd replaced 12 years ago. And near the bottom, folded in thirds, a piece of paper so yellowed at the edges, it felt fragile between my fingers. A handwritten receipt. $80,000. March 1998. Signed by Thomas Hayes. Made out to Harold Whitmore. Thomas came home that night with the receipt already in his coat pocket. Daniel had just started his first semester of college. We'd cleared out every account we had to cover the tuition gap, and what was left wouldn't last us more than 2 months. He sat down at the kitchen table, that same chair, and told me he'd lent the money to a man whose small construction business was 1 bad month away from going under. I put my fork down. You gave away what? There's a man who needs help. I believe in him. Thomas, we have $60 and a half tank of gas. I know. You don't even know this man. He waited until I finished. Then, very quietly, Nora, people don't remember what you kept. They remember what you gave. Standing in that kitchen 25 years ago, I was certain he was being naive. I had no idea he was planting something that would take 25 years to grow, something I would need long after he was gone, in a situation neither of us could have imagined. He didn't know it, and neither did I. I turned the receipt over in my hands. Harold Whitmore, printed in Thomas's careful handwriting, the letters slightly uneven the way they always got when he wrote fast. Harold Whitmore, Vivian's father. The man whose company Daniel now worked for. The man whose approval Vivian had been protecting so fiercely that she'd erased her mother-in-law from the wedding photos and coached her husband to declare his own mother dead from a podium in a rented tuxedo. The man who owed the foundation of everything he'd built to a handshake from Thomas Hayes. I set the receipt on the table, just sat there with it. Then I let myself think through the last 3 years. Every phone call where Vivian's voice answered instead of Daniel's. Every visit cut short by a scheduling conflict that had just come up. The birthday text at 11 at night, a flower emoji, nothing that required him to actually speak to me. Christmases on a video call that lasted 22 minutes before something came up. The pot of soup nobody ate. I went through all of it the way I used to go through, missing homework factually, completely, without feeling. Daniel hadn't stopped loving me. He'd just learned to translate love into absence and call it keeping the peace. Every time he made that choice, he stepped 1 inch further away. And neither of us noticed until the distance was too wide to see across. The anger I expected never came. Just tiredness. The specific kind that settles into your bones when you finally stop waiting for something that was never going to arrive. I smoothed the receipt flat against the table with the back of my hand. Then I reached for a sheet of paper. I wrote it once. No drafts, no crossing out, just the handwriting I'd used for 30 years of lesson notes. Clear, unhurried, slightly forward-leaning. 6 sentences. My name, my late husband's name. A statement that there were things about his family I believed he should know, not about money, not about business, but about the truth. And at the very bottom of the page, nothing else. No explanation, no plea. Just Thomas Hayes. Do you remember that name? I folded it once, sealed the envelope, and wrote across the front in block letters, personal and confidential, for Mr. Harold Whitmore only. I found the Whitmore Group's address on their company website. 30 seconds. Public information, right there on the contact page. I wrote it out, put a stamp in the corner, and walked to the post office 2 blocks away. Standing in that line, I counted the ways it could fail. A letter from a stranger, a retired teacher from Queens, with a $1,400 pension. It would land in a pile, get sorted by someone who'd never heard the name Thomas Hayes. Get set aside, get thrown out. I mailed it anyway. 3 days passed. The letter reached the Whitmore Group mailroom on a Tuesday. Harold's personal assistant, a woman who'd worked alongside him for 15 years and screened his correspondence every morning before he arrived, was halfway through, sorting the week's personal mail. When she picked up the envelope, she was about to drop it into the non-urgent pile. Then she held it up to the light, the way you do when something catches at you without you quite knowing why. She could make out 4 words through the thin paper. The last line of the letter. Thomas Hayes. Do you remember? She set the rest of the mail aside, placed that single envelope directly in the center of Harold's desk. Alone, nothing else around it. She'd heard Harold say that name exactly once a year, every year, always quietly, always on the same date, the anniversary of the company's first signed contract. He never went into much detail, just the name, and something brief about a man who'd believed in him when nobody else had. She wasn't going to put that in a pile. Harold didn't call immediately. First, he asked her to verify. Retired schoolteacher, Queens, New York, named Thomas Hayes, deceased. The confirmation came back within the hour. Wife, Nora Hayes, same address, everything matched. Only then did he pick up the phone. His voice wasn't the voice of a CEO returning a call. It was older than that, heavier. The voice of a man who'd been carrying something for a long time without knowing what to do with it. He told me about the gala, annual event, already scheduled. His team had already built in a tribute segment 25 years since the company's founding contract, and they wanted to acknowledge the people who had made it possible. I'd like you to be there, he said, as my honored guest. I'll be there, I said. The line went quiet for just a moment. Then we said goodbye. I sat at the kitchen table without moving for a little while. Just sat there. Then I went to the closet and took out the navy blue dress, the one I'd worn on the very last day before I retired, the one that had been hanging in the back ever since. I pressed it smooth with my hands, hung it on the back of the bedroom door. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Vivian. I didn't tell a single person. A trap doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs the right person, the right moment, and a truth old enough that no one can argue with it. The room was full by the time I walked in. Side entrance, navy dress, pearl pin. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and found a spot near the edge of the room where I could watch without drawing attention. Vivienne was easy to find. Red gown, main entrance, Harold at her side. Her hand rested on his arm, steering him from one introduction to the next, with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this evening many times before. Daniel stood just behind her right shoulder, tie straight, smile ready, everything exactly where she needed it. Then she turned to guide Harold toward a group across the room and stopped. He wasn't beside her anymore. She caught a server's arm. He pointed toward the side entrance. She turned. Harold was 30 feet away, in conversation with a woman in a simple navy dress. Not someone who'd just arrived. Someone mid-conversation, already comfortable. Harold's posture open, his attention fully on her. Vivienne stood completely still for a few seconds. That was the moment she understood. She hadn't lost control of the evening when I walked in. She'd lost it 2 weeks ago, the day a letter landed on her father's desk. Everything since had already been arranged. She was just the last person to know. She crossed the room. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." "By whom?" "Your father." Her voice climbed past what she'd intended. "You don't belong here. You're a retired schoolteacher from Queens on a government pension. This is not your world." Daniel had followed her. He stopped 3 steps to my left, glass in hand, eyes somewhere near the floor. Then he stepped forward and placed himself beside his wife. "Mum, careful, rehearsed. This isn't your place." 7 words. The nearest 2 tables heard every one. A manager appeared, tablet in hand, voice low. "Mrs. Nora Hayes is registered as Mr. Harold's personal guest." Vivienne's face moved through something fast, certainty, then confusion, then a flash of something that vanished before it could be named. Then came fury, because fury was easier to wear. She misrepresented herself. Security. A hard point at me. "Remove her. Now." 2 guards moved forward. They slowed when they got close, uncertain. I stepped back. My hip caught the banquet table behind me. The tower of glass goblets tipped. One hit the marble floor and shattered. My right hand went down to catch myself. A thin cut opened across the palm, a line of red against the white tablecloth. The room went completely silent. "Get her out." Vivienne's eyes never dropped to my hand. "Stop." Harold came in from the corridor off the main hall. He went directly to me, looked at my hand, spoke a staff member's name clearly, and asked for the first aid kit. He bandaged the cut himself. He did not look at Vivienne while he did it. When he turned to face the room, he didn't reach for a microphone. In 1998, this company nearly didn't survive its 3rd year. I needed $80,000 to hold 1 contract. Every bank said no. One man said yes, no collateral, no interest, no deadline. He handed me a check and said, "Harold, I believe in you." That man was Thomas Hayes, this woman's husband. He paused. "Some of you may wonder why I didn't connect the name sooner. The answer is simple. Thomas never mentioned the loan to anyone, not even to me, after that day. And I, ashamed of how close I'd come to losing everything, never spoke his name inside this company. Not to my staff, not to my own family. I only made the connection 2 weeks ago, when a letter arrived on my desk." He turned to face his daughter. "The woman you just ordered security to remove, whose hand is bleeding on my tablecloth right now, is the reason this company exists. And you are the reason I'm saying it here, in front of everyone, instead of in a quiet room." Vivienne's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I looked at Daniel. He took 1 step toward the exit, just one, just reflex, the automatic move he'd been making for 3 years whenever something was about to cost him. Then he stopped. He looked at the bandage on my hand, the red line already seeping through the white. Then he looked at my face. I wasn't crying. I wasn't asking him for a single thing. Just standing, both feet on the ground, the way I'd been standing for 6 years without leaning on anyone. It was the stillness that did it. Not the blood. Not Harold's speech. Not the room full of people watching. Just his mother, standing still, needing nothing from him. He didn't take another step toward the door. 2 days after the gala, a short meeting in Harold's office. Professional. When Daniel walked out, his face carried the look of someone who'd just heard a door close and understood it wasn't going to open again. The director position was no longer under consideration. No further discussion. He came to my apartment the following evening without calling ahead. I opened the door. He hadn't prepared anything, just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. I stepped aside and let him in. He noticed the shard before I did. A small piece of glass from the gala, caught in the rubber sole of the shoe I'd left by the door, tracked in without me realizing. He crouched down without being asked, worked it free with his fingers, and set it carefully on the shelf. He came in, sat at the kitchen table, stayed for just over an hour. We talked about small things, a neighbour's renovation, nothing that mattered and everything that did. Then he left. It was the first step of something that was going to take a long time. We both understood that without saying it. Vivienne made one more move. She contacted Harold's personal assistant, the same woman who had placed my letter on his desk, and asked her, quietly and off the record, to look into my history at the school. Any concerns? Any incidents? Any reason to question my state of mind? The assistant went directly to Harold before making a single inquiry. Harold called Vivienne that evening. The call lasted 4 minutes. She didn't reach out to anyone else after that. I called Margaret later that week. We made tea at opposite ends of the city and talked the way we used to talk during school lunch breaks easily, without needing to fill every silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't need to say anything more. I knew from the start you'd come out the other side." Thomas picked well. She hung up. That was the last we spoke of it. The following week, Harold announced the Thomas Hayes Scholarship annual grants for early career teachers in Queens. I signed the paperwork at a small meeting. No speeches, no photographs, just a pen, a dotted line, and my name written in the same hand that had written the letter 6 weeks before. That night I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for the empty chair across from me. I drank mine slowly, in no hurry at all, while the apartment settled into its quiet around me. The television stayed off, the chair stayed empty. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood.